Hey guys, today I'm going to be reviewing the 2008 adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. I have finally watched the 2008 adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. Yeah, guys, finally. I have a current subscription to BritBox, and I've just been kind of casually going through, especially like their Jane Austen collection, and I've just been trying to catch up on some of these Austen adaptations that I am just so severely behind on, and yes, Sense and Sensibility 2008 was one of those. So yeah, let's get into this review. This is a work of classic literature. It's been adapted many times. This video will most likely just have some spoilers in it naturally. I do apologize if you've never seen an adaptation of this or if you've never read the book, but yeah, I think to make this video easier, I'm just going to have spoilers in here, most likely. So yeah, let's get going. This is what you need to know about the 2008 adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. As I've already said, a work of classic literature by Jane Austen. You can currently find this on BritBox. That's how I consumed it. And it is 3-hour-long episodes, which I really liked, because, you know, compared to like the 1995 adaptation, that movie was, I think, a little over 2 hours. So this adaptation pretty much kind of had about an additional hour, which was nice. And the plot of Sense and Sensibility, in case you need a reminder, it follows sisters Eleanor and Mary Ann Dashwood as they try to find love and security in 1800s England. Reading it like that sounds really simple. You know, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of the core of the story in some ways. You know, two sisters struggling to survive within the circumstances that they have. Let's put this out here really quickly. You guys, the only other adaptation of Sense and Sensibility that I've seen is the classic, iconic 1995 adaptation that was directed by Ang Lee, and Emma Thompson wrote that adaptation, plus starred in it as Eleanor Dashwood. And yeah, that 1995 adaptation, just what a stellar cast. As I already mentioned, Emma Thompson playing Eleanor, Kate Winslet playing Mary Ann, Alan Rickman playing Colonel Brandon, Hugh Grant playing Edward Ferrars. That cast is stacked and phenomenal. And yeah, I remember watching that adaptation years ago. It was brilliant. I loved it. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. I love that cast. So heading into this 2008 adaptation, I was like, I have a lot of expectations for this adaptation because the 95 adaptation is so good. So I had a lot of high expectations, and I kind of initially went into this adaptation thinking, you know, I'm not going to overhype myself. I'm not going to overexcite myself because it might not be that good. But I tell you what, guys, I was very pleasantly surprised how great this 2008 adaptation was. I seriously really loved it. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did, and this may be a shock. If I had to pick which adaptation I like, I think I might have to go with this 2008 adaptation. There might be some of you being like, scandalous, that's blasphemous. And I wouldn't blame you if you thought that. Now, that's not to say that I totally don't want to watch the other one ever again. That 1995 one, as I said, it's a classic, it's iconic, and it's still just as amazing. But yeah, I think strangely enough, bizarrely enough, I don't know how this happened, I think I kind of liked this 2008 one just a little itty bit better. And I think why I might kind of like this one an itsy bit more is that just that additional hour that this show has. Like I said, the 95 movie was a little over 2 hours, and so this mini-series has that addition of having like a complete full extra third hour there, and I think that kind of helps. You know, I think this adaptation, since it's 3 episodes, it's able to kind of get into things a tiny bit more. It's able to let the characters breathe a little bit more and flesh them out a little bit more. Whereas, yeah, the 95, even though, once again, I love that, I love the characters and how it's portrayed in that, it is kind of this, it is almost kind of a little rushed on occasion, you know, because I do feel like sometimes it's not allowed to breathe entirely. And yeah, this 2008 adaptation, absolutely gorgeous. You know, the sets, the costuming, the hair, the makeup, everything is wonderful, gorgeous, everyone is beautiful. Now, let's talk about what I feel is perhaps like the biggest difference of this adaptation compared to the 95 adaptation. Now, correct me if maybe you feel differently, you know, disagree with me if you feel differently than how I feel. Because the 95 adaptation was written by Emma Thompson herself, I do believe the 95 adaptation is very heavily focused on Eleanor, who Emma Thompson plays. And even while reading the book by Jane Austen, which I read a long time ago, I do feel like the book is very heavily focused on Eleanor herself. Because Eleanor is supposed to be the sense and the part of Sense and Sensibility, you know? And yeah, Eleanor is a very kind of rational, pragmatic character. She's very sensible. She kind of thinks things through. So I do feel like Eleanor in the book and in the 95 adaptation, she's the strong focus, obviously. And I feel like this 2008 adaptation, once again, disagree with me if you don't feel the same way, but while I was watching the 2008 adaptation, I really felt like the adaptation was focusing a lot more on Mary Ann specifically. And there were many times that I felt like Eleanor was kind of pushed to the background. like almost as if this production found Mary Ann's character to be much more fascinating, and they wanted to explore kind of her emotional state of being more than Eleanor's, you know, almost as if they thought Eleanor was, I don't want to say boring because that sounds terrible, like almost as if they just didn't have an interest in Eleanor, like they kind of found her a little kind of boring and uninteresting, you know, and Mary Ann is so much more exciting. That's almost how it kind of felt with this adaptation, because as I said, I feel like this adaptation very strongly focused on Mary Ann, because I just don't remember that much of Kate Winslet. You know, I loved Kate Winslet in the 95 adaptation, and her character's there to serve her function, obviously, but I just don't remember her like hogging all the screen time like she does in this particular adaptation. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because even when I read the book, and even with the 1995 adaptation, Mary Ann is honestly my favorite character. I do find her more fascinating than Eleanor, even though Eleanor is the character I relate to, obviously. You know, I do think I relate more to Eleanor. The thing is, I do just like the character arc of Mary Ann the best, because Mary Ann, I think, goes through the most drama, the most turmoil, the most angst, poor thing. So yeah, do you guys, if those of you who have seen this 2008 adaptation, is that a fair comparison, or do you not agree? Because I really do feel like Mary Ann is the focus in some ways of this 2008 adaptation, and Eleanor is almost kind of pushed to the side a wee bit. Now, I will give one major dislike to this series, because I honestly don't really have anything to dislike with this series. My one big dislike that about totally turned me off from this whole production was the very first sequence that we see in episode 1 of this miniseries. The very first sequence that we see Willoughby, who is played by Dominic Cooper. We see his seduction of the character of Eliza, and it's all these close-up shots of like their faces or their lips or their hands or their skin. You know, it's really tight, close shots, and the volume is kind of elevated because you hear like kind of their breathing like in your ears. You know, if you're wearing microphones and whatnot, or a headset. And that, seriously, that opening sequence of episode 1 of this miniseries about totally turned me off, because I was like, this is not what Jane Austen is about. You know, Jane Austen is not about things being overly sexualized and sensualized. You know, it's not about like nudity or anything. Not that this opening sequence has any nudity, but I was suddenly like, oh Lord, are we about to get a nude sequence in a Sense and Sensibility adaptation? I'm not really here for that. You know, that's not what Jane Austen is about. You know, it's not that type of period drama. So the first opening sequence of episode 1 about took me totally out of it, because that kind of made me expect this adaptation to be a certain way, and fortunately it was not. It went back to traditional period drama fair after that sequence. It's like I don't know if they felt like they needed to open up with something kind of shocking and scandalous, with Willoughby's seduction of Eliza. I don't know if they needed to open that up just to have something thrilling and scandalous, to catch the eye of a viewer. But instead, for me, it was kind of a turnoff because, again, that's not Jane Austen. That's not what I expect in a Jane Austen adaptation. It's not that type of period drama. And yeah, just to run down this remarkable cast really quickly, just some of the highlights. Playing Eleanor Dashwood, we have Hattie Morahan. I don't think I've really seen Hattie Morahan in anything else. I feel like I went through her IMDb list and nothing was really standing out to me that I had seen her in. But I really loved her portrayal of Eleanor in this. Again, Eleanor is the sense in the Sense and Sensibility. She's the calm one. She's the rational one. She puts her emotions to the background, and I think out of all the characters, she's supposed to be the one that we relate to the most in some ways. And yeah, she's the oldest sister. She's in charge of this family and making sure things are running smoothly and that her sisters are in line. She has a lot of weight and responsibility on her shoulders. And again, she has to put her own wants and needs to the background, unfortunately, sometimes. And you just want to see her get her happy ending as well. And that's, when she finally does hook up with Edward, right at the tail end, the last split second of the show, when her and Edward finally get together and she has an emotional breakdown when he proposes to her, it's like, oh, thank God. Thank God that Eleanor is getting a happy ending too, because she deserves it. And then playing the character of Marianne Dashwood is Charity Wakefield. The only other thing I have seen Charity Wakefield in, she was in all 3 seasons of the Hulu series The Great, and I loved her on that. But yeah, Marianne Dashwood, she is personally my favorite character, even though I relate more to Eleanor. Marianne is personally my favorite character. Marianne is the complete opposite of Eleanor in some ways. Marianne is passionate. She's reckless. She's spontaneous. And those things oftentimes get her into trouble. And yeah, the thing is though, with both Eleanor and Marianne, their core relationship is bond is that of them as being sisters. They always go back to that at the end of the day. Even when they have their arguments and disagreements, they always go back to each other because they know that they can rely on each other, and they know that they at least have somebody who loves them truly and deeply, when the men in their lives disappoint them. But yeah, I love Marianne and this, what Charity Wakefield did with the performance, because once again, I love Kate Winslet in the 95 adaptation, but I do almost feel like Kate Winslet was playing a Marianne that was just almost a little, I don't know, kind of sporadic and a little all over the place and just a little too much on occasion sometimes, even though I loved her performance tonight. But yeah, Charity Wakefield, it's a little bit more of a kind of tamer Marianne to some degree, I feel like, but still retaining that essence of her being very passionate and reckless and spontaneous without kind of overdoing it. Playing Mrs. Dashwood, their mother, we have Janet McTeer. You guys, I adore Janet McTeer. She was in like the White Queen miniseries. I loved her in that. She was in like a season of Jessica Jones. She's going to be playing Professor McGonagall coming up in the Harry Potter HBO reboot series, you guys. Yeah, I love Janet McTeer in this, and her performance of Mrs. Dashwood. Yeah, she's a woman. She's fallen on hard times because her family is kind of in poverty now, essentially because her husband has died, and yeah, her family is at the beck and mercy of her son. They have to rely on his good nature and whatnot. So she has a lot that she's having to deal with, plus dealing with all 3 of her children, her daughters. She desperately needs to get married off at some point. And yeah, playing John Dashwood, who is the brother to Marianne and Eleanor and their little sister, playing John Dashwood, we do have Mark Gatiss. Mark Gatiss, he's not really in this particular adaptation very much. He's kind of there, kind of briefly throughout each episode, and he kind of serves his role and function. And yeah, I saw the character of John Dashwood. I saw him as a really weak, pathetic man to some degree. His wife was just running all over him and kind of luring him into doing things that he didn't really want to do. He wanted to provide for his family, but his wife is really greedy, and they were like, no, we need all the money to ourselves. Don't give them anything, So it's like he had good intentions initially, but instead of looking out for his family as he should, he let his greedy wife mind control him, essentially. Playing the character of Margaret Dashwood, she is the third Dashwood sister, you know, the youngest. Playing Margaret Dashwood, you guys, Lucy Boynton. Oh my god, seriously, when I was watching this episode, because again, this takes place, this adaptation was 2008. When Margaret popped up, I was like, oh my god, this little girl looks familiar. Who is she? So when the credits rolled at the very end of episode 1 and Lucy Boynton's name popped up, I was like, wait a minute. I was like, is Lucy Boynton little Margaret? And yeah, I just love Lucy Boynton and a lot of the things that she's in nowadays. Once again, this was 2008. We're currently in 2025. So yeah, Lucy Boynton is like a grown woman now. And yeah, I think a lot of people probably remember her from her role. She had like the lead female role on the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. Yeah, I recently this year on BritBox, I watched her in a really great show, the Ruth Ellis story. She was so great in that. Oh my god. So yeah, I love Lucy Boynton. Especially her roles, you know, as a grown woman now. But it was driving me nuts in episode 1. I was like, that little girl playing Margaret, she looks so familiar. What is it? There's something about her, I can't think who it is. And it's just funny that I didn't recognize her because the very first role that I saw Lucy Boynton in, if anybody remembers that movie called Ballet Shoes that had Emma Watson, Ballet Shoes was kind of one of Emma Watson's first big things that she did outside of Harry Potter. And yeah, Lucy Boynton was a character in that Emma Watson movie. So I'm kind of surprised I didn't recognize Lucy Boynton because I have seen her as a little girl in something else. But yeah, I love Lucy Boynton in this. I love the character of Margaret because Margaret's kind of a bit of like the tomboy, you know, kind of this whole no-nonsense attitude, and she's just really fun and spunky, you know. She's definitely kind of this middle ground, you know, even though she's the youngest sister, she's definitely kind of almost like in the middle, you know. She has certain personality traits that are like Eleanor, but also like Marianne to some degree. But yeah, Margaret is just such a wonderful, fun character. And Dan Stevens, you guys, let's move to Dan Stevens. He of Downton Abbey. Oh my god. Dan Stevens is playing Edward Ferrars, who is Eleanor's love interest. I loved Dan Stevens in this. I didn't know that I needed to see Dan Stevens in some Regency pants, you guys. Oh my god, I do love me some Regency pants on men. But yeah, Dan Stevens was so great in this. He, you know, the character of Edward is kind of just a naturally awkward character, you know, and I think Dan Stevens does kind of pull that off as best he can. And I loved his chemistry that he had with Hattie Morahan. Their chemistry was just so wonderful. You definitely bought into it. And yeah, when certain plot elements are going down and you're like, Edward, I'm a little frustrated with you right now, I hate you. But yeah, once he does come back to Eleanor and things kind of calm down and go the direction that they need to, you know, Edward comes back, he makes that kind of awkward proposal to Eleanor, and it's like, hallelujah, thank God. But yeah, I loved Dan Stevens in this. Yeah, playing Colonel Brandon, we have David Morrissey, and seriously, I don't know who I like more. Do I like David Morrissey or Alan Rickman? It's very hard to pick because they each kind of do their own thing with Colonel Brandon. But yeah, I really loved David Morrissey as Colonel Brandon because Colonel Brandon, he's kind of like that strong, silent type, you know. There's almost kind of like no humor to him, you know, but he's supposed to be older. He's a lot older than Mary Ann, and he's been through things, you know. He's been through things. He's had a life. He's had a wife, right? They mentioned that he had a wife at some point, right? Yeah, he's been through a lot of stuff. He's been through a lot of experiences that Marianne has yet to go through, you know, and he's just immediately smitten with Marianne, you know, and it's just so sweet and adorable. And yeah, him being older, of course, Marianne is like, oh, you're old, you know, even though he's only like 35 or so, you know, during that time period, it was totally acceptable for, you know, like a 16-year-old and a 35-year-old to get together, you know, back in the day. But yeah, Marianne definitely sees him like, oh, he's old, and he's boring and not fun, you know, and it's like, you get that, you know, you definitely get where Marianne is coming from eventually. But yeah, it's like that's kind of part of her learning lesson is, you know, sometimes the hot young thing is not all it's cracked out to be, you know, when they're a jackass and an idiot like Willoughby, you know. But yeah, I loved what David Morrissey was doing with Colonel Brandon. That was great. And yeah, I think him and Charity Wakefield, whenever their few scenes were together, I think they had a really great chemistry with one another. But yeah, I mentioned Mr. Willoughby just a second ago, played by Dominic Cooper. You guys, Dominic Cooper, I love Dominic Cooper. I've seen just about everything that man's been in. So yeah, him playing Willoughby is just spot on and perfect. Dominic Cooper, he's one of those actors, you know, sometimes he comes across as really likable in interviews, but sometimes he comes across as a bit of a jackass in interviews. So it's like Dominic Cooper is like the perfect person to play Willoughby, because Willoughby kind of has those personality traits that he's really charming and charismatic, but then there's other aspects. It's like, man, he's a bit of a jerk and a bit of a jackass, you know. Willoughby is just such a fascinating character, and I feel like this particular adaptation really wanted to get into his headspace and really seek to kind of understand him and understand his actions, you know, as deplorable as his actions are. But it's like this show is definitely making that attempt to kind of understand him and where he's coming from and why Marianne is so horribly attracted to him, you know. And they do, Charity Wakefield and Dominic Cooper, they have such intense chemistry with one another. And it's like, even though I know the direction his character is going to take, you know, how despicable he is, it's like it's like in the back of my head, it's like, oh god, Willoughby is so charming and he's so good looking, and it's like I do want him with Marianne, you know, even though I know they shouldn't be together. But yeah, their chemistry is just so amazing in this particular installment. Once again, because I feel like this adaptation is really focusing a lot on Marianne more than Eleanor, and I think in turn that means that Willoughby is focused on a lot more. So yeah, that's it for the main cast of characters. Yeah, in conclusion, I really was pleasantly surprised with this 2008 adaptation. I expected to go into it and not like it anywhere near as much as the 95 adaptation, which is just, again, classic and iconic. But yeah, strangely enough, I like this adaptation just a wee bit more, you guys, just a wee bit. You know, there's not like this big divide at all whatsoever. But yeah, I'm definitely curious. Have you guys seen this 2008 adaptation of Sense and Sensibility? How does it compare to you to the 95 adaptation? You know, what are your favorite performances from either or? So yeah, that's it for my thoughts and feelings. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.